That's what All right. Hey, 12 Church, Pastor David here. I am here with Kaitlyn to my left or right, whichever way it is on your computer. You may know her face if you call 12 Church your home. If you've ever been a VIP or first time visitor at our church, you've seen her face and she's helped you at the tent. But she is so much more than that. And I wanted to have a conversation with her about mental health and young people, teenagers specifically. We've been in a series called Out of My Mind, where we're talking about how the gospel of Jesus Christ informs and affects our mental health. The Bible has a lot to say on the subject. So we've been talking about what Jesus has to say concerning our mind and what the other authors of scripture have to say concerning our mind. But Kaitlyn has a lot to contribute to this conversation. So before we get started, Kaitlyn, would you introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about what you do professionally?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Kaitlyn Witherell. I am a licensed mental health counselor and licensed marriage and family therapist. I have been working at the Children's Advocacy Center in Hernando County now for a little over 2 years. And prior to that, I worked with teenage girls over at Pace Center for Girls over in Hernando County. So I work mostly with children and adolescents and a little bit with adults, but my favorite population for sure are my teenagers. I love working with them. So here at the Children Advocacy Center, mostly we work with trauma cases, so mostly sexual abuse and physical abuse, domestic violence cases. So that's my main population. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So, okay, I have a ton of questions.
Okay.
We've been talking a little bit about how this pandemic has affected physical health, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like the conversation is shifting towards how this pandemic is going to affect mental health after it's all said and done. When that's going to be, obviously, there's still a lot of uncertainty. And I am very passionate about teenagers and young people. I come from youth ministry, did youth ministry for over a decade. So I understand a little bit about students and young people in particular. But let me just ask you this, I guess. How big of a deal is mental health among teenagers, among young people? Like, you'll hear some people say there's a mental health crisis among young people. Is it that big of a deal? Are we blowing it out of proportion? Is it something that you would say a majority of young people struggle with to some degree? Maybe just diagnose it for us. Is it a big deal at all? Is it even worth talking about? Or are we making it too big of a deal? What are your thoughts?
No, I think it's a big deal for sure. I do believe that more people should be talking about it. I think the teenagers probably talk about it more now than they ever have, which is a good thing. I don't know if it's pandemic related that they talk about it more. Maybe they've had to. I don't know if it's caused that. Social media probably. I can go on a soapbox about that, but
We'll get there.
They talk about it more. Yeah, we'll get there. I know.
We'll get to social media here in a second. So you do think it's a big deal? You think like,
I do think it's a big.
Yeah. Would you say most young people probably struggle to some degree, whether they would willing to admit it or not? They probably struggle to some degree. Now, you said you primarily work with trauma victims.
Yes.
And so talk to us about, without getting into any specifics, because I know that you can't talk about your individual cases, obviously, but like, talk to me a little bit about your clientele as a whole. So you see people dealing with stress, depression, anxiety, and probably a long list of things, but those things that are directly related to some sort of trauma in their life.
Yes, yeah. So a whole spectrum of it. Usually in my case, we see the depression, anxiety more as symptoms of the trauma. Not that those things wouldn't exist maybe anyway, but in mine, they come in maybe presenting with those, but really at the basis, it's based on the trauma they've experienced in their lives, I would say. But I do think those exist as well outside of maybe traumatic experiences. Just in my scope, though, I definitely see that more based on the trauma they've experienced.
Yeah. So like sexual abuse.
Yes, for
physical
sure.
abuse,
Domestic violence. witnessing domestic violence among their parents. Even some, we see traumatic grief cases, so death by suicide or overdose of their parents, for sure.
You mentioned the word suicide. Now, how is it affecting them? I mean, how is this trauma affecting them? Like, is it mostly affecting them by causing anger, anxiety, stress? Are they lashing out in need of it? Because my thought would be, like the trauma, and I'm not a mental health expert. That's why I have you on the call, of course. But they experience this trauma, and then the effects of it must manifest itself in certain ways. So is it coming out in that they are becoming depressed, they're becoming anxious, they're becoming angry, they're seeking attention? How does it manifest itself after they experience this trauma?
So I would say you see it usually one in two ways. You see either the heightened side of it where you get the anxiety. I can go really into it. You see the fight or flight side of it where you can get the anxiety or the anger. You see maybe the overwhelm, the chaotic responses, the running away. You can see the addictions on that, the running away, wanting to cover up, the really risk-taking responses of that on the extreme sides, the impulsivity in the teenagers, aggressive behaviors, the ones who maybe skip school, the hyperarousal type responses, or you see the freeze response of the trauma, where they are internalized, they disassociate, they memory loss, they don't really know what's really going on from one moment to the other, lack of concentration. Those are the ones you see really kind of poor grades sometimes. You can kind of see that on both sides, but
Sure.
No display of emotion. So very flat. That's the depression. A lot of the times you see they don't really know emotion from one side or the other because they don't really care to experience emotion. You hear that from a lot of these kids that they don't want to feel anything and they think they can drown out the negative emotions. I don't really like negative, the uncomfortable emotions, but they drown out all the emotions. Kids can't numb out just the uncomfortable ones. So you numb out the all range of emotions, and then you get the self-harm, the suicidal ideation in that.
Is that a big deal? Self-harm,
huge.
suicide? Because I was sharing with someone recently that I've done several suicide funerals for teenagers, and one is too many.
Yes.
But I mean, how big of a deal is it among teenagers? Whether self-harm all the way to suicide, let's just say, is it a pretty big deal?
Yes, I was actually just going through statistics with a client the other day because I see her boyfriend committed suicide by firearm. Actually, it was horrible. And so a teenager, it was her first experience with any of it. It's horrible, but I was going through the statistics with her. And I think in our country, suicide in general among ages from like 10 to the 30s is the second leading cause of death among those ages, like in general. So the second leading cause. And then in our state, it's the third leading cause of death from ages of 10 to like early 30s. So it's a huge deal, suicide. So I mean, you would think, yeah, I want to say it was second in the country under like accidental deaths. So you have accidental and then intentional, which I thought was just insane. And then self-harm is huge because those you see as more of I think people tend to mix them up, for self-harm and suicide are kind of the same thing, but a lot of times it's not. People who are self-harming are not always suicidal. A lot of times they're not at all. It's very much a coping, or well, it is coping, but it's a lack of healthy coping. You see it as an internalization, a lot of unhealthy emotion, or of their emotions, not knowing how to handle their emotions, anger at themselves, anger at other people. There's a lot of different reasons people self-harm. Sometimes it is trying to meet needs and not knowing how to do to that, so they hurt themselves. There's a lot of a range of reasons that people self-harm, but it's very big.
Well, now what would you say to the person, and this is not me, this is like a hypothetical person who wants to contribute to the conversation, and they were to say something like, they're just being dramatic, like they're just blowing everything out of proportion, and they're dumb kids and stupid teenagers, and they're just being dramatic. And the more we give it attention, the bigger of a deal it's going to be, because if you give them attention, that's what they want. But so that almost sort of like like, let's just stop talking about it. Let's just stop paying attention to it, because that's ultimately what the kids want. And it's why they're doing it. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, we hear that all the time from parents, actually. Yeah.
Really? Do you?
Yeah, that they're just seeking attention. Like, why do
So
we
like, it's not a big deal?
Yeah, it's not a big deal. Or sometimes they do kind of like overdo it, and we're like, okay, it's, let's deal with this on a, like, calm down, and we'll figure this out. But I do try to say, like, listen, even if it is some sort of like attention seeking, I like to say, what type of needs are they trying to meet? Have you ever tried to get your needs met by hurting yourself? Have you ever needed something so bad to where you felt like you needed to hurt yourself? Usually that kind of gives them a pause, because not usually. And if they have, then why was that? So that kind of gives them a pause, because something is going on inside that causes them to want to hurt themselves, burn themselves, cut themselves, whatever it might be. And that's a big deal. Even if it might not be a big deal in our world, it's a big deal in their world. Usually with my clients, it is, what we would consider a big deal. But even if it's not, even if we as adults tend to minimize what's going on in their teenage world, it's a big deal in their world. And so we have to bring ourselves down into their teenage world and remember what it's like as teenagers, even if it is seemingly not a big deal in their small little microcosm there, it is a big deal to them. And if it is, and it's causing them enough to do themselves harm, we need to meet that and figure out what it is they're searching for and help.
And you say, like, sometimes we forget what it's like to be a teenager, and the truth is, like, you and I are roughly similar in age, although you're younger than me.
Yes.
And I would never ask about your age. But even for people like us in our age range, like millennials, being a teenager today is completely different.
Oh, so different.
And it sounds like, it's it's silly sometimes for us to say that, because it's like back in our day, as though it was a million years ago, and we're talking
Nothing
about,
makes me sound older.
right? Yeah. But we're talking about 10 or 12 years ago.
Yes.
And even so, or 10 to 15 years ago, but being a teenager was completely different. I mean, we what we experienced as teenagers, we were living in a different world. And so even the temptation to say something like, we remember what it's like to be a teenager, in a sense we really don't. And even those who are older than us, even more so, because this wave of teenagers are the first to experience what it's like to be a teenager today. So it's almost like we're living in a social experiment. And
we are.
And what is driving that is social media. Yes. And I'm going to call you back to it, because you said you get on a soapbox about it, but I don't think we could talk about it enough. We were talking the other day, and you said that you had a love-hate relationship with social media, as do I. So let's talk about it. How great social media is, how it can connect people all over the world. Some of the positives: connects people all over the world, gives people a voice, gives people a platform to spread awareness for causes, or build their brands, or drive sales for their business. So much communicating is done online. It's gotten the gospel.
Pandemics.
Yeah, it's gotten the gospel to millions and millions of people all over the world who would otherwise have not necessarily received that message. It's extended the reach of a lot of different churches and ministries. And so praise God for all of that. We always say at our church that we want to leverage the gift of social media. However, the dark side of social media that some do not see or talk about. Obviously, the number one consumer of social media is probably, I don't have the exact statistic in front of me, but I assume that young people are the primary consumers of social media. What's that doing? What's that doing to them? How is that affecting them? I mean, what are we looking at here? Is it just dancing online? Doing funny dance videos or whatever. I mean, what is this doing? How is this affecting their mental health? Yeah. What is this producing in young people? Where are they going to be 10 years from now because of it? Talk to me about it.
Oh goodness, I can spiral into cyberbullying, trafficking, obviously child abuse, sex abuse, all of it just from social media alone, let alone the lack of just effective communication skills I see coming from that, and the isolation. I mean, of course I can go into the fact that I think the positive side is I think the stigma for mental health and mental illness has gone down from social media through the pandemic. I think they have become a little less isolated because of social media and stuff. They were able to find online communities. But on the flip side of that, what kind of online communities have they reached out to? And if they were already having issues with their mental illness and mental health or whatever it was, were they reaching out to poor social supports? Or and then of course what I see here are most of the time, yes, they're reaching out to people grooming them and people that are and mind you, of course my scope here is not, I don't know, but it's not great. I see high statistics here of obviously, trafficking. We did and actually I think it's trafficking awareness month this month, but
Is it really?
it is, yeah. I think tomorrow we're doing, or is it next week? I don't know. Tomorrow, no, I think we're doing trafficking awareness. But I did a recent presentation on this for it's super high, the trafficking through online, and it's no longer just the highway or things like that. It's so high online. To reach out, the grooming and stuff like that. And then yes, the cyberbullying. I mean, it's no longer kids are bullied just in school. They can't escape it anymore.
Right.
You find pages of they don't, it's just TikTok and Snapchat, and then they take their text messages and they edit things to make things look worse, and then forget the sexting and the things that get sent, and then that's also child pornography, and it's just yeah.
That's one example of like something we didn't, you and I, for example, and others our age, it wasn't,
at least.
Like I remember, in high school there, there were kids maybe with cell phones, but like it didn't become a thing where we all had cell phones till about when I was in maybe senior year or college, when it became like everybody had a cell phone. But even then it was like you only got a certain amount of text messages a month. Like we're aging ourselves a little bit, but now it is just available, it is instant, it is global, it is permanent. And because what I've always seen, because to remind everyone that's sort of listening in, I've never worked as a counselor concerning the mental health effects caused by trauma in young people. But I have worked with kids and talked with kids and pastored kids dealing with mental health effects from, I hate to say this, but silly things. What I mean is like the reason why I've seen kids that are quote depressed, and I use that I put that terms in quotes, not to disrespect it, but to say that I've encountered kids, 14, 15-year-old kids who are quote depressed. But really what that is them scrolling through Instagram or TikTok for hours and hours and hours on end, comparing themselves to every other kid. Girls struggling now with body image issues, guys, even, I don't even want to make that a female issue, even guys, same way, comparing their followers count, comparing how many likes their selfie got to somebody else's. And so at the risk of sounding insensitive, that has always caused me to kind of, not physically, but in my head, I'm rolling my eyes, right? So I've got a 15-year-old girl, let's say, who's like, I'm depressed, I'm so anxious, I have this or that. And it's like, well, I know how to probably solve that. You need to delete your Instagram account, right? You need to just get off of that. You need to like go outside. You need to like make a friend, like, and so I probably sound like a bully right now. I probably sound like a big fat jerk. But concerning, before we get to the trauma side of things, the young people that are struggling in that way, I mean, am I onto something or am I completely out of bounds? And you can tell me if I am. But are there simple, practical solutions to some of the things that young people are dealing with emotionally or mentally? Things like could be cured by getting off of the screen for 20 hours a day, learning how to interact with people face to face, going outside. their diet being better, whatever it is, like, are there practical things that could contribute to them, getting over some of those things, or am I out of bounds on that?
Yes, I absolutely think there is. I think excessive screen time has been linked to a lot of issues, sleep problems, probably poor diet, and absolutely self-esteem. I think there's been research that says the amount of likes on Instagram has been linked to the same receptors that heroin hits, because it's addictive. So there absolutely, it absolutely is.
What are we doing to ourselves?
It absolutely is. But I want to come back and say that I don't actually necessarily expect these teenagers to do that. That's where I go back on the parents. I see parents all the time who do not think that they have any control over these kids and their phones. They're like, well, what am I supposed to do? It's their phone. No, a phone and social media is not a right. It's a privilege.
I would snap it right in front of my kids.
And it's a really hard argument I have, and I don't argue necessarily, but it's a difficult thing, because it is such a normalized culture at this point. Phones, social media, it's just normal. So at this point, it's not even argued that kids spend all this time on social media and comparing, but it is an issue. The stuff does. So the normal self-esteem issues we saw developmentally at these ages that come with puberty and all this developmental stuff you found at middle school and high school ages is way worsened now by social media and screen time. But I don't see all the time things being done. And I can tell you, I think I was saying this the other day, I can tell you the difference I see in children who come in and their parents don't let them have a phone or severely limit their screen time, versus the ones who are on their phones all the time. They make eye contact with me. They have way more effective communication skills, and they are more confident in themselves. They just are. And
the ones that are not on the screen all the time, they're more confident.
I don't even need them to tell me that. And of course they have the normal teenage, self-esteem stuff and comparison stuff you get from school and just their developmental ages. But I don't necessarily expect the teenagers to be able to make those decisions. Even developmentally, their brain capacity can't necessarily do that. We need to teach them that. Those are parents and adult things to do. That's why we're here, that's why we do that and teach those skills.
And what happens if that goes unchecked? What I mean, where does that lead? I mean, so you got a kid that's let's just say, for the sake of our conversation, they're minimally bummed out because their friends are getting more like they don't even know why they are, but we can see, obviously, from an objective perspective, that they're comparing their body image or their likes or their whatever on social media, or they're getting picked on from kids, and that's continuing online, whatever. And if that just goes unsolved or unchecked, I mean, where does that lead? I mean, what is that going to produce in them if that doesn't get solved, if they don't take steps, if them or their parents or both don't take steps to figuring that out? I mean, where's that going? I mean, what's that going to be like for them 10, 15 years from now? Do we even know? Like, what is a 35-year-old?
I don't even think we've started to see where that can go yet, because we're still kind of in the cusp of that and things kind of blowing up. But I don't see how that's going to go, because you have their world that they're being told that this is the most important thing, and in this world it is. And then you have a lot of the adults in their life being like, this is stupid, this is not that important, but really to them it is. So they're getting it from both sides, and they don't know what to do.
It's a social experiment. It's like we're just gambling with an entire generation of people. And right now we're figuring out what all of the things that you sometimes hear millennials get made fun of for. And now millennials are at a certain age where they're having children, they're starting businesses, they're in the workforce and all that, and we're sort of seeing all of the effects of what happened to us as children now. And they have said before, like, the thing that sort of defined our generation, our age group, the thing that sort of is a common thread among all of us was September 11th, 2001. Like, that was kind of I was reading an article, that had talked about that was like a common trauma, where we all sort of experienced it, but in different ways. And it just kind of it was like a common, and now, unfortunately, they're calling COVID sort of that, like that common trauma that these young people are all experiencing, but in different ways.
Yes,
and how that's, and we don't even know what that's going to look like 15 years from now. What, these, and so that's why I want to talk about trauma real quick. So we've talked about the kid that's depressed because of, my friend's not my friend anymore, or she's prettier than me, or he called me, whatever it is. But now let's talk about trauma.
Real quick, I do want to say with that too, with the phones, they really severely lack learning any coping skills too. We just see kids who have no idea what it is to have hobbies, no idea what it's like to have friends or social supports, because they're just staring at a screen. So when I think I'm coming and going, okay, where are basis of coping mechanisms here at all? And aside from maybe unlearning unhealthy ones, but they don't have really any, because they're anxious. And what do? They pick up their phone, because
that is their coping
mechanism. Comfort. Yes, that is their only comfort.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes looking at videos of dogs is really fun, but that can't be your only thing to do, right? And honestly, though, we see adults do it though, don't we? They're in uncomfortable social situations, so they watch their parents do it now. And so we have no starting point for coping skills at all. Let's not go outside. And I think you're right. Go outside, go do something.
I was just saying that as a simple way of saying anything else. Like I said, find a hobby.
Go get your endorphins up. Yes.
And so
anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's perfect, because you talk about coping skills and things like that for little things, but on the trauma side of things, we don't know the effects of trauma just yet necessarily, whether it's something as simple as the effects of a pandemic, which could be called, I think rightfully and fairly so, traumatic to varying degrees for different people, specifically young people, if they experience loss of a loved one because of it, or they were isolated for an extended period of time from other people. You were talking about not teenagers, but younger children, what the effects are of having to wear a mask around people for an extended period of time, and being taught that everyone else around you is a threat, or sick, or you could die, I don't even know what that does psychologically to a child, and I don't think any of us do. No. And so maybe I'll ask it this way, what does, in your opinion, nobody's holding you to this, but what does 2040 look like concerning what we're dealing with now and the effects that we're all going to experience over the next 18 to 20 years? Are we going to have serious fallout, you think, in the mental health category because of this? And if so, is there anything we can do? Is there anything that we can do as parents to our children? Is there anything we can do as young people, or to encourage one another? Let's use our imaginations for a little bit. What does 2040 look like? Now we've got 30 to 40-year-old people who went through this as a teenager, this trauma. What's that going to look like for them?
I think we will see effects of this. I feel like it's hard not to, just because of all the other stuff we've been saying, and now it's been definitely worsened by the pandemic. We've seen isolation worsened. I know kids were already nervous about returning to school because they've been away for so long, and you've had kids who had social anxiety who were happy to be home, but then they had to return, and so you were making social anxiety worse. And then you had kids who didn't want to go, they wanted to go back, but then they didn't know anybody because they were in elementary school, and then they were skipping to high school, or all these different things, that skipping stages that they should have been able to go through. And you had all these different things, that stages that they should have been able to go through, and they weren't able to, basically. And so I think, and then that's aside from, you said it affected people differently, and I think it did. You had people, depending on the professions their parents were in, you had job losses, you had obviously deaths that they had to go through. These things changed people's lives depending on how they experienced the pandemic. You had some who didn't really have to experience it at all, depending on how their family reacted to it. or some who experienced it intensely. So it really depends. And then I know in our office, and probably other places who do what we do, we were really concerned. Even summers we do this, so it was really tenfold. When schools are not in, we get really concerned, because where do we get a lot of our reports from? We get them from teachers and law enforcement, who lay their eyes on kids because they see abuse, they see domestic violence in the home, so they come in. So when kids aren't in schools anymore, what happens? Abuse increases, domestic violence cases increase. So for sure, when kids are stuck at home, abuse got worse, domestic violence cases got worse. So absolutely, this stuff made those things worse because the stressors increased. And so those things absolutely grew during a pandemic.
Oh, that's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to imagine.
Yeah, I have no doubt. We don't have numbers on that yet, but I know actually our referrals here have increased incredibly. Like our caseloads are huge. We have waiting lists. And I don't know if that's
in the last 2 years or year.
In the last 6 months, and usually during the holidays we're pretty slow, and that we've got a lot of referrals lately. So I don't know what that's from. It may not be pandemic related or not, but it's just that stuff for sure has made I'm sure even families who may not have ever been so stressed, I'm sure those things increase. And I don't, if they don't have the coping skills to begin with, or not, and that's not making excuses for abuse, of course, but you don't know how. So those things change trajectories of people's lives in general. So how you see that now come 30 years and generational stuff, if that's not addressed and given intervention. And then to address your latter question, like I don't think it's hopeless. I don't think anything's hopeless. I for sure think things can be done. It just has to be, given the proper attention and intervention, for sure. I think if these kids are paid attention to and people actually address it and we care, I think absolutely things can be done. I think people just need to care.
So last question, and this has been kind of a common thread among my teaching on this subject as I preach to this series, and I've tried to reach out and had great conversations with several mental health professionals, such as yourself. You're the first and only that I've talked to that works specifically, or I guess mostly, with young people. But from doctors to counselors to therapists, there has been seemingly a common thread between every conversation I have had and everything I draw from scripture, ironically, and everything I've taught from stage. And that is getting to the root cause of the problem and not just dealing with symptoms of the problem. And at the risk of sounding repetitive, like maybe people who have watched the other videos I've done with people or listened to me on stage, they're like, gosh, here we go with this again. But the risk of sounding repetitive is, would you agree there's validity to that regardless of whether or not it's something small or significant, whether it's trauma related or social media comparison related or wherever it's coming from, how important is it for you, specifically in regards to how you interact with your clients, to get to the root of the issue, the underlying cause, the real heart of the matter, rather than just the symptoms of what it's causing?
Always. You always have to get to the
number one priority, or no? Is it your number one priority? Like, is that the first thing you're trying to do? Is that because like I said, I've never worked in that capacity, so I don't quite know, but give us a glimpse as to what that looks like. Is that like the first thing you're trying to do, or is that
I would say the first thing is usually develop the relationship with my client. I would say making sure the relationship with the client is usually, if I don't have that, we can't go very far. Trust me, for sure. I would throw that out there, but absolutely. I mean, I can say all day long, oh, you're experiencing anxiety and depression, but if I don't figure out where that's coming from and why you're, having panic attacks all the time, or why you're self-harming, or what the reason is and what that means to you, I can say all day day long, you're experiencing trauma symptoms, but what does that trauma mean to you, and why is that happening in your life? That I can't do anything for you. It can mean, somebody can even experience the same, quote unquote, same thing, but I have to figure out what that means to that person, and their experience in that and the root cause of that before I can do anything with them. And just be with them.
Yeah, I because I've said over and over, like, I think we've become obsessed with attacking, quote, symptoms of everything related to mental health, and not getting to the root cause of the issue, the underlying cause of the issue, and until that happens, I'm not sure that there can be healing. But
yeah,
we've been trying to put together a resource page, and we have. It's on our website at 12.church/help. It's forever growing. But if you are, let's say you watch this video and you know of someone who, might need some help, or you yourself might need some help, we wanted to put together a resource page. So if you go to our website, it's 12.church/help. And there are a lot of resources there for you. You can find numbers to hotlines and counseling centers and an abundance of resources. But as we close our conversation, Kaitlyn, is there a way you would encourage people? Let's say they did watch this video, right? And they've made it to the end, and they're like, man, I'm raising a teenager, or I'm familiar with a young person, or maybe they themselves are a young person, and they don't know what it is exactly, but they understand now something's wrong, and they might need some help. How would you encourage them? Would you point them in a particular direction? Are there resources available for them that you are aware of? How would you encourage that person that says, man, I don't know what it is necessarily, but I think I need to get some help?
Well, I mean, to teens, I usually tell them, talk to a trusted adult. Like at all, it's okay if you don't know what it is, talk to somebody you trust, and then let them help you. Even if you can't find it yourself, that's fine. Parents as well, honestly, like, don't let that stop you ever. It's better to talk. Don't, keep it in, because things grow in the dark always. So don't keep it in. When it comes to resources, there's a lot of hotlines out there. I think you said you put a lot of that on your page. So, I can always send you more of those too, but there's a lot.
Yeah, it's a forever growing page.
Prevention, yeah. I have a trafficking hotline out there, so I'm really big on that. I don't know if you have that, but I can send you that as well.
Oh, send it to me.
Okay. So there's that. I know obviously we have our Children's Advocacy Center here. We take referrals for, mostly abuse cases, traumatic grief, things like that. But there is also one in Pasco. We have Children Advocacy Centers kind of all over. So
they would need to go to their physician?
No, anyone.
How would they get a referral? What's that?
You could always refer. Anyone can refer, really. So if they went, or they can call, really. So even if they called the Hernando CAC or Pasco, Kids First is the one there. Anyone would really point them to. What I really love about where I work is we want to help. So it's as long as they could, and we're grant funded. So that's why we kind of be a little in particular about the cases we take, but as if we could, we want to help, and if not, we can point in the right direction.
Yeah, so I think the theme is that there is help available.
There is,
and so if there is something that is causing you to feel like you need help, just don't let it lay dormant. You said it really well, Kaitlyn, that kind of stuff grows in the dark, so drag it into the light. Find somebody you trust, make a phone call. Don't be afraid to intervene for somebody or to advocate for somebody if you feel necessary. Kaitlyn, I cannot thank you enough for having this conversation. If you call 12 Church your home, I'm sure you're going to see her around. So be sure to just thank her for her time. But Kaitlyn, thank you for talking with me and for shining a light a little bit on some of these things. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I really do.
Yeah, of course. You're welcome. Thank you.
Hey, have a good one, Kaitlyn. And hey, if you're watching this, share this video to encourage somebody. Bye-bye.
Bye.